Using the gravity model, looking for anomalies. A gravity model fits the data on U.S. trade with European countries well but not perfectly. The Netherlands, Belgium and Ireland trade much more with the United States than predicted by a gravity model. Ireland has strong cultural affinity due to common language and history of migration. The Netherlands and Belgium have transport cost advantages due to their location. This is the border effect in action. It proves that sharing a national border, meaning the same laws, currency, and lack of customs, is a more powerful driver of trade than just economic size alone. Even with a free trade agreement, the international border still creates a massive barrier compared to trading within the same country. Impediments to trade. Distance, barriers, and borders. There is other things besides size that matter for trade. First is distance. Distance between markets influences transportation costs and therefore the cost of imports and exports. Second is cultural affinity. Close cultural ties, such as a common language, usually lead to strong economic ties. Third is geography. Ocean harbors and a lack of mountain barriers make transportation and trade easier. Fourth is multinational corporations. Corporations spread across different nations import and export many goods between their divisions. Lastly is borders. Crossing borders involves formalities that take time, often different currencies need to be exchanged, and perhaps monetary costs like tariffs reduce trade. Estimates of the effect of distance from the gravity model predict that a 1% increase in the distance between countries is associated with a decrease in the volume of trade of 0.7% to 1%. Besides distance, borders increase the cost and time needed to trade. Trade agreements between countries are intended to reduce the formalities and tariffs needed to cross borders, and therefore to increase trade. The U.S. signed a free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Because of NAFTA and because Mexico and Canada are close to the U.S., the amount of trade between the U.S. and its northern and southern neighbors as a fraction of GDP is larger than between the U.S. and European countries. Canada's economy is roughly the same size as Spain's, around 10% of EU GDP, but Canada trades as much with the United States as does all of Europe. To understand why our neighbors are our biggest partners, we have to look at the combination of policy and geography. First, we have NAFTA. By removing tariffs between the US, Canada, and Mexico, this agreement created a free trade zone where goods move without extra taxes. Second, we have the advantage of distance. Because these countries are right next to each other, transportation costs are extremely low. It is much cheaper and faster to send a truck across the border to Ontario or Monterrey than it is to send a cargo ship to Europe. This combination of zero tariffs and short distance is exactly why Canada and Mexico consistently sit at the top of our trade charts. Economic size and trade with the United States. This graph provides clear evidence for the first part of our gravity model, which is, size matters. If you look at the horizontal axis, we have the GDP of various European countries, and on the vertical axis, we have their total trade with the US. The diagonal trend line shows a clear positive relationship. The largest economies, like Germany, the UK, and France, are positioned at the top right because their massive economic size creates the highest volume of trade. Smaller economies are clustered at the bottom left. This confirms that even when distance is roughly similar, the economic mass of a partner is what truly pulls trade toward it. Here we see why borders still matter, even when they seem invisible. We're using the US and Canada as our prime example because, on paper, they should be the easiest trading partners in the world. These two countries share a language, a similar culture, and a free trade agreement. You'd think trading between them would be as simple as driving across a street. But even with all those green lights, the data shows that just having a border there, a line on a map, significantly reduces the amount of trade that happens. Borders aren't just about taxes, tariffs. They represent different laws, different currencies, and different ways of doing things that make international trade much harder than domestic trade. This map provides the visual evidence for the border effect we just discussed. It compares the trade partners of British Columbia, BC, Canada. The map labels Canadian provinces, 0 to 6, and U.S. states, 1 to 6, that have significant trade relationships with British Columbia. Notice that British Columbia trades heavily with New Brunswick, 6, and Quebec, 5, even though they are on the opposite side of the continent. Conversely, BC trades much less with nearby U.S. states like Montana, 2, or Ohio, 4, despite them being geographically closer than eastern Canada. The numbers show that internal trade, within the same country, is much stronger than international trade, proving that the border acts as a massive, invisible wall that distance alone cannot explain. The changing pattern of world trade. Has the world gotten smaller? The negative effect of distance on trade according to the gravity models is significant, but has grown smaller over time due to modern transportation and communication. Technologies that have increased trade including wheels, sails, compasses, railroads, telegraph, steam power, automobiles, telephones, airplanes, computers, fax machines, internet, fiber optics, personal digital assistants, GPS satellites. Today, the world is more economically connected than ever before, with global exports making up a much larger slice of the world's GDP than in any previous century. This is what is called re-emergence of global trade, specifically how the world became highly integrated, then retreated, and is now more connected than ever. Continue. Political factors, such as wars, can change trade patterns much more than innovations in transportation and communication. World trade grew rapidly from 1870 to 1913. Then it suffered a sharp decline due to the two world wars and the Great Depression. It started to recover around 1945 but did not recover fully until around 1970. Since 1970, world trade as a fraction of world GDP has achieved unprecedented heights. Vertical disintegration of production has contributed to the rise in the value of world trade through extensive cross-shipping of components. This graph shows the historical trend of global trade from 1900 to 2010. It measures the ratio of manufacturers' trade to production, essentially showing how much of what the world makes is actually traded across borders. The early 1900s, which is the pre-war stability, trade was relatively stable but limited. The Great Collapse in 1914 until 1945, you'll notice two major gaps and a sharp decline. This represents the disruption caused by World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. Global trade essentially fell as countries turned inward and economies were destroyed. The post-war rise in 1950 until present. After 1950, trade began an explosive, exponential climb. By 2010, the ratio reached record highs, far exceeding anything seen in the early 20th century. The massive increase in trade starting 1950 are because of the increase in technology, policy and global supply chains. Notice the sharp dip right at the end of the graph. That represents the 2008 global financial crisis, showing how sensitive world trade is to major economic shocks. Now let's look into, what do we trade? What kinds of products do nations trade now, and how does this composition compare to trade in the past? Today, about 53%, of the volume of trade is in manufactured products such as automobiles, computers, and clothing. Services such as shipping, insurance, legal fees, and spending by tourists account for about 20% of the volume of trade. Mineral products, example, petroleum, coal, copper, remain an important part of world trade at 19%. Agricultural products are a relatively small, 8%, part of trade. This pie chart shows the composition of world trade in 2011, breaking down exactly what types of things countries buy and sell from one another. Manufactures, 53%, this is the largest slice. It includes finished goods like cars, computers, clothing, and machinery. More than half of all global trade involves manufactured products. Services, 20%, this represents intangible trade. It includes things like travel, insurance, banking, and software consulting. This sector has grown significantly as the world becomes more digital. Fuels and mining product, 19%. This includes natural resources like oil, coal, gas, and various metals, minerals. This slice can fluctuate in value depending on global oil prices. Agricultural products, 8%. This is the smallest slice, covering food, crops, and raw materials like timber or wool. In the past, a large fraction of the volume of trade came from agricultural and mineral products. In 1910, Britain mainly imported agricultural and mineral products, although manufactured products still represented most of the volume of exports. In 1910, the U.S. mainly imported and exported agricultural products and mineral products. In 2002, manufactured products made up most of the volume of imports and exports for both countries. This table shows how the composition of trade, specifically manufactured goods, has changed for the United Kingdom and the United States between 1910 and 2011. For the United Kingdom, in 1910, UK was already a manufacturing powerhouse, with 75.4% of its exports being manufactured goods. By 2011, this stayed relatively stable at 72.1%. The biggest change is for imports. In 1910, the UK only imported 24.5% of manufactured goods, meaning they mostly imported raw materials or food. By 2011, this jumped to 69.1%, showing that the UK now buys as many finished goods as it sells. Whereas for the United States saw a significant increase in its manufacturing exports, rising from 47.5% in 1910 to 65.3% in 2011. Similar to the UK, U.S. imports of manufactured goods grew from 40.7% to 67.2%. The bottom of the table is a blank template for Malaysia. Could you find the historical data to fill it in? Low and middle-income countries have also changed the composition of their trade. In 2001, about 65% of exports from low and middle-income countries were manufactured products, and only 10% of exports were agricultural products. In 1960, about 58% of exports from low and middle-income countries were agricultural products and only 12% of exports were manufactured products. More than 90% of the exports of China, the largest developing country and a rapidly growing force in world trade, consist of manufactured goods. This graph captures a massive structural shift in the global economy over a 40-year period, which is 1960 until 2001. It shows how developing countries transformed from being farms and mines into factories. The agricultural decline shows in blue line. In 1960, agricultural products dominated exports for developing nations, accounting for nearly 60%. By 2001, this plummeted to just 10%. The manufacturing surge shows in red line. Conversely, manufactured goods started at a low of about 12% in 1960. There was a massive takeoff around 1980, and by 2001, manufacturing represented roughly 65% of all exports. Notice that between 1980 and 1990, the two lines crossed. This was the historical moment when developing nations officially became more industrialized than agricultural. This slide displays a bar chart ranking the world's 20 largest exporting countries as of July 2010, measured in monthly US dollars, USD. It provides a snapshot of global trade power at that specific time. China is the clear leader, with monthly exports exceeding $143 billion. The United States follows in second place at approximately $105 billion. Germany holds the third spot, very close to the US at roughly $103 billion. Malaysia is ranked 20th on this elite list, with monthly exports of approximately $16.9 billion. This shows that Malaysia is a global player. Being in the top 20 is a major achievement for a country with a smaller population than the giants like China or the US. It proves that Malaysia is a highly open economy that relies heavily on international trade. Also, you can see other Asian countries on the list, including South Korea, 8th, Hong Kong, 10th, Singapore, 14th, and Taiwan, 15th. Now let's look into the service outsourcing. Outsourcing is the business practice of hiring a party outside a company to perform services or create goods that were traditionally performed in-house by the company's own employees and staff. What is some modern examples of service outsourcing in Malaysia, like call centers or IT support? Can you find the examples? Service outsourcing, or offshoring, occurs when a firm that provides services moves its operations to a foreign location. Service outsourcing can occur for services that can be transmitted electronically. A firm may move its customer service centers whose telephone calls can be transmitted electronically to a foreign location. Other services may not lend themselves to being performed remotely. Service outsourcing is currently not a significant part of trade. Some jobs are tradable and thus have the potential to be outsourced. Most jobs, about 60%, need to be done close to the customer, making them non-tradable. This chart shows tradable industries' share of employment, illustrates the distribution of jobs across various sectors of the economy, categorized by whether the products or services they provide can be easily traded internationally. The pie chart divides employment into two primary categories. First are non-tradable industries with 60%. This is the largest segment. These are industries where the service must typically be performed or consumed locally. Examples often include construction, local government, and personal healthcare, where the product cannot be shipped across borders. Second are tradable industries, 40% combined. These are sectors that produce goods or services that can be traded globally. This category is further broken down into professional services, 14%, including things like legal, accounting, and consulting services. Manufacturing, 12%, traditionally considered the core of trade, it represents about an eighth of total employment in this dataset. Retail or wholesale, 7%, the logistics and supply chain services for this industry are often tradable. And other sector including public administration, 2%, personal services, 2%, agriculture, 1%, and mining, utilities, construction, 1%, show smaller share. This table lists the 10 global biggest exporting industries based on data for the year 2022. It ranks industries by their total export value, measured in billions of dollars. Pharmaceuticals and medicine manufacturing leads the list with over $650 billion in exports. The majority of the list, 8 out of 10, consists of manufacturing sectors, including automobiles, apparel, electronics, and semiconductors. Overall, the data shows that global trade is heavily dominated by high-value manufactured goods and essential energy resources. As a summary, the 5 largest trading partners with the US are Canada, China, Mexico, Japan, and Germany. The largest economies in the EU undertake the largest fraction of the total trade between the EU and the US. The gravity model predicts that the volume of trade is directly related to the GDP of each trading partner and is inversely related to the distance between them.